Maria's alarm went off at 4 in the morning, just like it did every single day. She groaned and reached over to silence it, her hand fumbling in the darkness of her tiny apartment. The room was so small that she could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms, but it was hers and she worked hard to keep it. She dragged herself out of bed and got dressed quickly. The November air was already seeping through the thin walls, making her shiver. Maria pulled on 2 sweaters, one over the other, because the heating in her building barely worked. She grabbed her worn-out backpack and headed out the door. The streets were empty and dark as she walked to the diner. Most people were still sleeping in their warm beds, but Maria had learned a long time ago that sleep was a luxury she couldn't always afford. She was 19 years old and trying to put herself through college. Between classes, homework, and her job at the diner, she barely had time to breathe. The diner wasn't much to look at. It was one of those old places with cracked vinyl seats and flickering neon lights. But the owner, Mr. Chen, was kind to her. He let her pick up the early morning shifts that nobody else wanted, and he never complained when she had to study during slow hours. Maria arrived at 10 minutes to 5 and used her key to let herself in through the back door. The kitchen was dark and quiet. She flipped on the lights and started getting everything ready for the breakfast rush. First, she filled the coffee makers. Then she started prepping the tables, making sure the salt and pepper shakers were full and the ketchup bottles weren't empty. By 5:30, she had already served 3 customers. Truck drivers mostly, men who were passing through town and needed coffee strong enough to keep them awake for another few hundred miles. They usually left small tips, but Maria appreciated every quarter and dollar bill. Around 6 in the morning, Mr. Chen called her. His voice sounded rough and tired on the phone. He told her he was sick and wouldn't be able to come in until later. Could she handle the morning shift alone? Maria said yes, even though it meant she'd have to do everything by herself. She needed this job too much to say no. The next hour passed in a blur. More customers came in, and Maria rushed between taking orders, serving food, and clearing tables. Her feet were already starting to hurt, but she pushed through it. She'd gotten used to the pain. It was almost 7 when she finally had a quiet moment. The early morning rush had died down, and only 2 customers sat in the corner booth reading newspapers and sipping coffee. Maria decided it was a good time to take out the trash. She grabbed the heavy trash bags from the kitchen and pushed open the back door with her shoulder. The alley behind the diner was narrow and dark, even though the sun was starting to come up. There were dumpsters lined up against the brick wall, and the smell was awful. Maria tried to breathe through her mouth as she lifted the bags into the nearest dumpster. That's when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. A tiny, weak cry that didn't sound like a cat or a rat or any of the usual alley noises. Maria froze, listening hard. There it was again. A crying sound, fragile and desperate. Her heart started pounding. She looked around the alley, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be coming from one of the dumpsters, the one right next to where she was standing. Maria's hands were shaking as she walked closer to the dumpster. She stood on her tiptoes and looked inside, but it was too dark to see anything. The crying got a little louder, more urgent. Without thinking, she climbed up on an old crate and leaned over the edge of the dumpster. She saw a cardboard box tucked between garbage bags. And inside that box, wrapped in a dirty blanket, was a baby. Maria felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. For a second, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. A baby. Someone had left a baby in the trash like it was nothing, like it was garbage. The baby's cries were getting weaker. Maria snapped out of her shock and reached into the dumpster. She grabbed the box carefully and pulled it out, nearly losing her balance in the process. Once she had it safely in her arms, she looked down at the tiny face. The baby couldn't have been more than a few hours old. Its skin was pale and cold, and parts of the umbilical cord were still attached. Maria felt tears streaming down her face. How could anyone do this? How could anyone throw away a human life like it meant nothing? She quickly unwrapped her own jacket and wrapped it around the baby, holding it close to her chest to keep it warm. The baby's cries got a little stronger, and Maria took that as a good sign. She ran back into the diner as fast as she could. The 2 customers looked up in surprise when she burst through the door, holding a bundle and crying. One of them, an older woman, stood up immediately. "What happened?" the woman asked. "I found a baby," Maria managed to say between sobs. "Someone left a baby in the trash. We need to call for help." The woman pulled out her phone and dialed 911 while her companion came over to look at the baby. Maria sat down in the nearest booth, still holding the infant close. She could feel the baby's tiny heart beating against her chest. While they waited for the ambulance, Maria noticed something she hadn't seen before. The baby had a distinctive birthmark on its shoulder, shaped almost like a star, and tucked into the dirty blanket was a gold locket. It looked expensive, really expensive. The kind of thing that didn't belong in a dumpster behind a rundown diner. Maria carefully opened the locket with one hand, while still holding the baby with the other. Inside, she found 2 initials engraved in fancy script. E.W. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, though it felt like hours to Maria. The paramedics rushed in and immediately started checking the baby's vital signs. One of them, a young guy with kind eyes, kept telling Maria that she did the right thing, that she saved this baby's life. The police came right after the ambulance. A detective, an older man with gray hair and a serious face, started asking Maria questions. What time did she find the baby? Did she see anyone in the alley? Did she notice anything unusual? Maria answered everything as best as she could, but her mind was foggy. She was still in shock. The detective wrote everything down in his notebook. He also took the locket, putting it carefully into an evidence bag. You did good today, the detective told her before he left. Most people would have walked away. But you didn't. You saved a life. After everyone left, Maria just sat in the empty diner. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows. Her coffee had gone cold, and she was still wearing only 2 sweaters because her jacket was wrapped around a baby she'd found in the trash. She looked at her hands. They were still shaking. She thought about that tiny face, those weak cries, that expensive locket that didn't make any sense. Who was this baby? Who were the parents? And why would anyone do something so horrible? Maria didn't know it yet, but finding that baby was about to change her entire life. Nothing would ever be the same again. Maria couldn't focus on anything for the rest of that day. She went through the motions at work, pouring coffee and taking orders, but her mind was somewhere else. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that tiny baby wrapped in a dirty blanket. She kept thinking about how cold the baby must have been, how scared. Mr. Chen came in around noon, still looking sick but worried about her. He'd heard what happened from the customers who'd been there. He told Maria to take the rest of the day off, but she refused. She needed to work. She needed the money. And honestly, she needed the distraction. But that night, alone in her small apartment, Maria broke down. She sat on her bed and cried harder than she had in years. Not just for the baby, but for everything. For how unfair life was. For how some people had so much while others had nothing. For how someone could throw away a life like it didn't matter. The next morning, Maria woke up with a decision already made in her mind. She had to know if the baby was okay. She called the hospital and asked about the infant that had been brought in yesterday morning. The nurse on the phone was hesitant at first, but when Maria explained that she was the one who found the baby, the nurse's voice softened. The baby is doing well, the nurse said. Surprisingly well, considering everything. You got her there just in time. Her. It was a girl. Maria asked if she could visit, and the nurse told her that would be fine. So after her shift at the diner ended, Maria took 2 buses across town to get to the hospital. She couldn't afford a taxi, and the bus fare alone was money she didn't really have to spare, but she had to see the baby. The hospital was in a nicer part of town, the kind of place Maria didn't usually go. Everything looked clean and new and expensive. She felt out of place in her worn-out jeans and old sneakers, but she walked up to the reception desk anyway. A volunteer directed her to the neonatal unit. Maria had to wash her hands and put on a gown before they'd let her in. The nurse from the phone, a middle-aged woman with warm brown eyes, recognized her immediately. You're the young lady who found Baby Hope, the nurse said, smiling. That's what we've been calling her. Baby Hope. The nurse led Maria to an incubator where the baby lay sleeping. She looked so much better than she had yesterday. Her skin had color now, and she was wearing a tiny hospital gown. There were monitors attached to her, but the nurse assured Maria that everything was fine. Can I hold her? Maria asked quietly. The nurse nodded and carefully lifted the baby from the incubator. She placed the infant in Maria's arms, and Maria felt her heart break all over again. The baby was so small, so perfect, so innocent. How could anyone abandon her? Maria visited the hospital every day after that. It became part of her routine. Work at the diner, then take 2 buses across town to sit with Baby Hope for an hour or 2 before heading home to study. It was exhausting. and she was spending money on bus fare that she really needed for other things, but she couldn't stop herself. The nurses started to recognize her. They'd smile when she walked in and have baby Hope ready for her. Maria would hold the baby, talk to her softly, sometimes sing little songs she remembered from her own childhood. She felt connected to this baby in a way she couldn't explain. Meanwhile, Detective James Reed was working the case. He was a veteran cop, close to retirement, and he'd seen a lot of terrible things in his career. But something about this case bothered him more than usual. Maybe it was the locket. Maybe it was the fact that someone had thrown away a newborn baby like trash. Whatever it was, he couldn't let it go. He started by tracing the locket. It was clearly expensive, made of real gold with detailed engraving. That kind of custom work wasn't cheap, and there were only so many jewelers in the city who did that level of craftsmanship. It took him 3 days, but he finally found the right store. It was in the wealthiest part of the city, the kind of place with a buzzer at the door and security cameras everywhere. The owner, an elderly man who'd been in the business for 40 years, remembered making that locket. It was a special order, the jeweler told Detective Reed, for the Whitmore family, Elizabeth Whitmore specifically. Her father commissioned it for her 16th birthday. Detective Reed felt his stomach drop. The Whitmore family. Everyone in the city knew that name. Richard Whitmore was a business tycoon, the kind of man who owned half the buildings downtown and had politicians on speed dial. His family was old money, the kind that went back generations. "Do you remember when this was made?" the detective asked. The jeweler checked his records. "About 2 years ago. Beautiful piece. I put her initials inside just like Mr. Whitmore requested." Detective Reed thanked the man and left the store. His mind was racing. If that locket belonged to Elizabeth Whitmore, then there was a good chance that baby Hope was her daughter. But Elizabeth Whitmore was only 17 years old, and according to the society pages in the newspaper, she'd been studying abroad in Switzerland for the past 6 months, or at least, that's what the family claimed. The detective decided to pay the Whitmore family a visit. Their house wasn't really a house. It was a mansion on the edge of the city, surrounded by tall iron gates and perfectly manicured lawns. Detective Reed showed his badge to the security guard at the gate, who made a phone call before letting him through. A housekeeper answered the door, a nervous-looking woman in her 50s. She told the detective that Mr. Whitmore wasn't home, but his lawyer was. 2 minutes later, a man in an expensive suit appeared in the doorway. "Detective Reed," the lawyer said smoothly. "How can we help you?" The detective explained that he was investigating an abandoned baby case and had traced a piece of evidence back to the Whitmore family. The lawyer's expression didn't change at all. "I'm afraid I don't know anything about that," the lawyer said, "and Mr. Whitmore certainly wouldn't either. Now, if you'll excuse me." "I need to speak with Elizabeth Whitmore," Detective Reed interrupted. "Miss Whitmore is studying abroad. She's not available." "Then I'll need contact information so I can reach her." The lawyer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Miss Whitmore is a minor, and any communication with her would need to go through her father or myself. If you have any further questions, Detective, I suggest you obtain a warrant." The door closed in Detective Reed's face. He stood there for a moment, frustrated. The lawyer was hiding something. He was sure of it. Back at the hospital, Maria was having her own strange experience. She'd just finished visiting baby Hope and was waiting at the bus stop when a black car pulled up next to her. The window rolled down and a man in a suit leaned out. "Maria Santos?" he asked. Maria's heart started pounding. "Who's asking?" "I have something for you," the man said. He handed her an envelope through the window. Then the car drove away before she could ask any questions. Maria stood there staring at the envelope. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. Inside, she found cash. A lot of cash. She counted it twice to make sure she wasn't seeing things. $5,000. There was also a note typed on plain white paper. "Thank you for saving her. Please forget you ever saw her." Maria felt sick to her stomach. Someone was trying to pay her off. Someone wanted her to stay quiet about the baby. But who and why? She thought about keeping the money. God knows she needed it. $5,000 would change her life. She could pay her rent for months. She could focus on her studies instead of working herself to exhaustion. She could finally breathe, but she couldn't do it. Every time she looked at that money, she thought about baby Hope lying in that dumpster. She thought about how someone had tried to throw away a human life, and now that same someone was trying to buy her silence. Maria took the envelope straight to the police station. She asked for Detective Reed and waited in the lobby until he came down. When she handed him the envelope and told him what happened, his face went dark. "Did you see who gave this to you?" he asked, a man in a suit. "He was in a black car. I didn't get the license plate." Detective Reed looked at the note for a long time. Then he looked at Maria with something like respect in his eyes. "Most people would have kept this money," he said quietly. "I'm not most people," Maria replied. The detective nodded. "No, you're not." He told Maria to be careful, to watch her back. Someone was trying to cover up what happened to Baby Hope, and they had money and power on their side. But Maria wasn't scared. Well, she was scared, but she was also angry. And sometimes anger is stronger than fear. That night, Detective Reed worked late in his office. He spread out everything he knew about the case. The locket, the Whitmore family, the payoff attempt, Elizabeth Whitmore's convenient absence from the country. Something wasn't adding up. If Elizabeth Whitmore had given birth to this baby, where did it happen? Who helped her? And who decided to throw that baby away? He made some calls to contacts he had in other departments. He pulled strings that he probably shouldn't have pulled. And slowly, piece by piece, a picture started to form. Elizabeth Whitmore hadn't been in Switzerland at all. She'd been at the Whitmore mansion the entire time, hidden away from the public eye. And 9 months ago, around the time she would have gotten pregnant, there had been a big scandal at her private school involving a teacher who'd suddenly resigned. Detective Reed felt his blood boil. A 17-year-old girl, pregnant and scared, hidden away by her powerful family. And when the baby came, instead of helping their own daughter, someone in that family had decided the problem should just disappear. He picked up his phone and called his captain. It was time to get that warrant. The Whitmore family might have money and power and fancy lawyers, but they weren't above the law. Nobody was. The next day, when Maria went to visit Baby Hope, she found Detective Reed waiting for her in the hospital lobby. "I need you to tell me everything one more time," he said. "Every detail you remember about finding that baby. Because I think I know who she belongs to, and I'm going to make sure they pay for what they did." Detective Reed got his warrant 2 days later. It took that long because judges don't like going after powerful families without solid evidence. But Reed had built a strong enough case. The locket, the mysterious payoff, Elizabeth Whitmore's suspicious absence from public life, and the timeline all pointed to the same conclusion. He showed up at the Whitmore mansion at 8 in the morning with 3 other officers and a social worker. The same housekeeper from before answered the door, but this time she couldn't turn them away. Detective Reed held up the warrant and the woman's face went pale. "Where is Elizabeth Whitmore?" he asked firmly. I don't know," the housekeeper stammered. "Mr. Whitmore said We know she's not in Switzerland," Reed interrupted. "We know she's been here the whole time. Now are you going to tell me where she is, or am I going to have to search this entire house?" Before the housekeeper could answer, a voice called out from upstairs. "I'm here." Everyone looked up. A teenage girl was standing at the top of the grand staircase. She was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. She looked exhausted and scared and sad all at the same time. "Elizabeth Whitmore?" Detective Reed asked gently. The girl nodded and slowly came down the stairs. Her hands were shaking. "I need to ask you some questions," the detective said, "about a baby that was found 3 weeks ago." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears immediately. "Is she alive?" she whispered. "Please tell me she's alive." "She's alive. She's safe, thanks to someone who found her and got her help right away." Elizabeth covered her face with her hands and started sobbing. The social worker moved closer to her, putting a gentle hand on her shoulder. Detective Reed felt his anger at the family grow even stronger. This was a child herself, and someone had put her through hell. "Where's your father?" Reed asked. "At work," Elizabeth said through her tears. "He's always at work. And your mother?" "She died when I was 10. The detective nodded. "That explains some things. Elizabeth, I need you to tell me what happened. All of it. From the beginning." What came out over the next hour was heartbreaking. Elizabeth told them everything, her words tumbling out between sobs. She'd gotten involved with a teacher at her school, a man in his late 20s who told her she was mature for her age, special, different from other girls. Looking back, she knew it was wrong. She knew he'd manipulated her, but at the time she'd thought she was in love. When she found out she was pregnant, she was terrified. She told the teacher and he panicked. He quit his job and left the state without another word to her. Elizabeth was alone, scared, and had no idea what to do. She tried to hide it for as long as she could. Baggy clothes, avoiding her father, making excuses for why she felt sick. But eventually her father noticed. Richard Whitmore was furious. Not concerned. Not worried about his teenage daughter. Just angry that she'd embarrassed him, that she'd become a problem. He pulled her out of school immediately and told everyone she was studying abroad. He kept her locked in the house, barely let her leave her room. He told her that she was a disgrace, that she'd ruined their family name, that he'd deal with everything. Elizabeth begged him to let her keep the baby. She knew she was young, but she wanted to try. She wanted to be a mother, but Richard Whitmore wouldn't hear it. He told her that there would be a private adoption arranged, that the baby would go to a good family, and that Elizabeth would never speak of this again. When Elizabeth went into labor, her father didn't take her to a hospital. Instead, he called a private doctor who came to the house. The doctor delivered the baby in Elizabeth's bedroom. She got to hold her daughter for maybe 5 minutes before her father took the baby away. He told me the adoptive parents were waiting, Elizabeth sobbed. He said they'd take good care of her. He said it was for the best. But I didn't want to give her up. I didn't want to. What happened to your locket? Detective Reed asked gently. I put it in the blanket with her, Elizabeth said. I wanted her to have something from me. Something so she'd know I loved her. That I wanted to keep her. Detective Reed felt sick. He looked at the housekeeper who was standing in the corner with tears running down her face. You knew about this, he said to her. The housekeeper nodded miserably. Mr. Whitmore told me to dispose of the baby. Those were his exact words. Dispose of it? He said it wasn't his grandchild. It was a problem that needed to be eliminated. He gave me money and told me to make it disappear. So you put a newborn baby in a dumpster, Reed said, his voice hard. I didn't know what else to do, the housekeeper cried. I needed my job. I have a family to support. Mr. Whitmore said if I didn't do it, he'd have me deported. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Detective Reed wanted to arrest her on the spot, but he needed her testimony against Richard Whitmore. She was a witness, maybe the most important witness he had. Where is Richard Whitmore right now? He asked. The housekeeper gave him the address of Whitmore's office downtown. Reed immediately called for backup and headed there with 2 officers. He left the social worker with Elizabeth, who needed medical attention and therapy and about 1,000 other things. Richard Whitmore was in a meeting when Detective Reed arrived at his office building. His secretary tried to stop them, but Reed walked right past her. He opened the conference room door without knocking. Richard Whitmore, Reed said loudly, you're under arrest for child endangerment, conspiracy to commit child abandonment, and obstruction of justice. The room went silent. Richard Whitmore stood up slowly. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and cold eyes. He looked at Detective Reed like he was something unpleasant stuck to his shoe. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Whitmore said calmly. I know exactly who I'm talking to, Reed replied. Someone who ordered his own granddaughter to be thrown away like trash. The people in the meeting gasped. Whitmore's face went red. That's absurd. I want my lawyer. Right now. Your lawyer can meet you at the station, Reed said. He nodded to the other officers who moved forward to handcuff Whitmore. The businessman struggled for a moment, then seemed to realize it was pointless. As they led him out of the building, reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story were already gathering outside. Cameras flashed. People shouted questions. Richard Whitmore kept his head down, but everyone got their photos. The news exploded across the city within hours. It was everywhere. The newspapers, the TV news, social media. The story of the powerful business tycoon who'd ordered his own grandchild to be abandoned. The teenage daughter he'd hidden away. The baby left in a dumpster to die. And at the center of it all, the young woman who'd saved that baby's life. Maria found out about the arrests when a reporter showed up at the diner. Then another reporter. Then another. Soon there were cameras outside, and Mr. Chen had to lock the door to keep them out. Maria hid in the kitchen, overwhelmed and scared. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted to know that baby Hope was okay. Detective Reed called her that evening. He told her everything that had happened. about Elizabeth and Richard Whitmore and the housekeeper. He told her that Elizabeth wanted to meet her, wanted to thank her for saving her daughter's life. "She's just a kid herself," Reed said quietly. "A scared kid who got taken advantage of by an adult and then betrayed by her own father. She loved that baby, Maria. She wanted to keep her." Maria wiped away tears. "Can I see her? Can I meet her? I think that can be arranged." They met at the hospital 3 days later. Maria was nervous. She didn't know what to say to someone who'd been through so much trauma, but when she walked into the room and saw Elizabeth holding baby Hope, all her nervousness disappeared. Elizabeth looked up at Maria with red, swollen eyes. "You saved her," she whispered. "You saved my baby." Maria sat down next to her. "She's beautiful." "I wanted to keep her so badly," Elizabeth said, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. "But my father, he wouldn't let me. He said she was a mistake." "But she's not a mistake. She's perfect." For a while, they just sat together, both of them looking at the baby. Baby Hope was asleep, peaceful and safe, with no idea about the chaos surrounding her existence. "What's going to happen now?" Maria asked. "I don't know," Elizabeth admitted. "Child Services says I need to decide if I want to keep her or if she should go to foster care. But I'm 17. I'm still in high school. I don't have any money of my own, and my father is in jail because of me." "Not because of you," Maria said firmly. "Because of what he did." "None of this is your fault." Elizabeth looked at her gratefully. "The social worker said you've been visiting her every day. Since the day you found her." Maria nodded. "I couldn't stay away. I needed to make sure she was okay." Something changed in Elizabeth's expression. She looked at Maria for a long moment, really looked at her. "You love her," Elizabeth said. It wasn't a question. Maria felt her throat tighten. "I know I have no right to. She's not mine, but yes, I love her." Elizabeth was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that changed everything. "Maybe she could be yours." Maria's head snapped up. "What?" "I want what's best for her," Elizabeth said slowly. "And right now, I don't know if I can give her what she needs. I'm too young. I'm too damaged. I need to heal from what my father did to me. But you saved her life. You visit her every day, even though you barely have money for the bus. You love her. I can see it." "Elizabeth, I'm not deciding anything today," Elizabeth interrupted. "I need time to think. But I want you to think about it too, about whether you'd want to raise her. Because if I can't keep her, I want her to go to someone who'll love her the way she deserves. And I think that might be you." Maria couldn't speak. She just held Elizabeth's hand and looked at baby Hope, this tiny person who'd changed all their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Outside the hospital room, Detective Reed stood guard. The media circus was still in full swing. Richard Whitmore's lawyers were already working on his defense. The housekeeper had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Elizabeth would need months, maybe years of therapy. But inside that room, 3 people sat together in the quiet. A teenage mother who'd had her child ripped away, a poor college student who'd found a baby in the trash and couldn't let go, and a baby girl who didn't know how many lives she'd touched, how many people loved her, how close she'd come to never having a chance at all. The story was far from over, but at least now the truth was out. The media attention didn't die down. If anything, it got worse. Reporters camped outside Maria's apartment building. They waited for her outside the diner. They shouted questions at her whenever she tried to go anywhere. The story had everything people loved: a rich villain, an innocent victim, and a hero who came from nothing. Maria hated every second of it. She wasn't a hero. She'd just done what any decent person would do. But the news people didn't care about that. They wanted sound bites and dramatic stories. They wanted her to cry on camera or say angry things about Richard Whitmore. She refused all interview requests. She just wanted to be left alone. She wanted to go to work, go to class, visit the baby at the hospital, and live her life. But that wasn't possible anymore. Mr. Chen had to hire security for the diner because reporters kept bothering customers. Maria felt terrible about it. She offered to quit, but Mr. Chen wouldn't hear of it. "You did a good thing," he told her. "I'm not going to punish you for that. This will blow over eventually. Media moves on to the next story. Always does, but it didn't blow over quickly. The trial was coming up, and Richard Whitmore's lawyers were doing everything they could to destroy the case. They claimed the housekeeper was lying. They said Elizabeth was mentally unstable and couldn't be trusted. They tried to paint Richard as a concerned father who'd been trying to protect his daughter. Nobody was buying it. The evidence was too strong. The locket, the testimony, the timeline, everything pointed to Richard Whitmore orchestrating the abandonment of his own grandchild. The district attorney was confident they'd get a conviction. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was living in a facility for teenage mothers. Child Services had placed her there after determining that staying at the mansion wasn't safe for her mental health. The facility provided therapy, education, and support for young mothers in crisis. Elizabeth visited her daughter at the hospital every day, just like Maria did. Sometimes they'd overlap, and they'd sit together with the baby. Other times, they missed each other completely. But either way, baby Hope was never alone for long. The baby was thriving. She'd gained weight, her color was good, and the doctors said she was perfectly healthy. It was a miracle, really. Most babies who went through what she'd been through wouldn't have survived. But this little girl was a fighter. The nurses had stopped calling her Baby Hope. Now they called her by the name Maria had started using, Sophia. It just seemed to fit her. Elizabeth liked it too. One day, about 6 weeks after the arrest, Maria got called into a meeting with Child Services. She was nervous going in, not sure what they wanted. A social worker named Patricia sat her down in a small office and got straight to the point. Elizabeth Whitmore has expressed interest in having you adopt her daughter, Patricia said. Is that something you'd consider? Maria felt her heart start pounding. She'd been thinking about Elizabeth's words every single day since that conversation at the hospital. But thinking about something and actually being asked about it were two very different things. I don't know if I could, Maria said honestly. I'm 19. I work at a diner. I live in a studio apartment that's barely big enough for me. I'm trying to put myself through college. How could I possibly raise a baby? Patricia nodded. Those are all valid concerns, but Elizabeth has been very clear that if she can't keep Sophia herself, she wants you to have her. Not a stranger. You. Why me? Because you saved her daughter's life. Because you've been there every single day since. Because Elizabeth sees something in you that she wants for her child. Patricia paused. But Maria, I'll be honest with you. This won't be easy. Single parenthood never is. Especially when you're young and don't have much money. Child Services would have to approve you first. We'd need to do a home study, background checks, the whole process. Would I pass? Maria asked quietly. I think you might, Patricia said. You have a job. You have no criminal record. You've shown consistent commitment to this child. Your apartment is small, but it's clean and safe. You'd need to figure out childcare so you could work and go to school. But it's not impossible. Maria left the meeting with her head spinning. Could she really do this? Could she raise a child when she could barely take care of herself? That night, she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She called her mother. Maria's relationship with her mother was complicated. Her mom lived 3 states away with her new husband and his kids. When Maria was 16, her mother had told her there wasn't room for her in the new family, that Maria needed to figure things out on her own. It had broken Maria's heart, but she'd survived. She'd made her own way, but now she needed advice from someone who'd raised a child. Even if that someone hadn't been the best parent, her mother answered on the 3rd ring. Maria, is everything okay? I need to talk to you about something, Maria said. She told her mother everything. About finding Sophia, about Elizabeth, about the possibility of adoption. Her mother was quiet for a long time after Maria finished talking. That's a big decision, her mother finally said. I know. You'd be giving up your youth, your freedom, your ability to just be a regular college kid. I know that too. Another pause. Then her mother said something surprising. I think you'd be good at it. Maria felt tears well up in her eyes. Really? You're stronger than I ever was, her mother said. When I had you, I was young and scared, and I made a lot of mistakes. I wasn't ready to be a mother. But you've been taking care of yourself since you were 16. You know what it means to struggle. You know what it means to fight for what you need. That baby would be lucky to have you. It wasn't exactly an apology for the past, but it was something. And right now, Maria needed to hear it. Over the next few weeks, Maria met with Child Services multiple times. They came to her apartment and looked around. They interviewed Mr. Chen, who gave her a glowing recommendation. They talked to her professors, her neighbors, anyone who knew her. At the same time, Elizabeth was going through her own process. The therapy was helping her, but she was still dealing with so much trauma. Her father had controlled every aspect of her life, and now she had to figure out who she was without him. It was exhausting. Her therapist asked her what she really wanted for Sophia, not what she thought she should want, not what would look good to other people. What did her heart tell her? "I want her to be happy," Elizabeth said through tears. "I want her to have a mother who's ready to be a mother. And right now I'm not. I love her so much it hurts. But love isn't always enough. Do you think Maria would be a good mother to her?" Elizabeth nodded without hesitation. "I think Maria would die for her. I've seen how she looks at Sophia. She loves her the same way I do, but she's ready in a way I'm not. And you're okay with that?" "No," Elizabeth admitted. "It breaks my heart. But I'm trying to think about what's best for Sophia, not what's best for me. And right now the best thing for Sophia is to have a stable home with someone who can give her everything I can't." The therapist asked if Elizabeth had considered an open adoption, where she'd still be part of Sophia's life. "I've thought about it," Elizabeth said. "I want to be in her life somehow. Maybe not as her mom, but as someone who loves her." "Is that selfish?" "It's human," the therapist said gently. 2 months after Sophia was found, Maria got a call from Patricia. "Can you come to my office? There's something we need to discuss." Maria's hands were shaking when she walked into the office. Patricia was there along with Elizabeth and her therapist. Maria sat down, looking between them nervously. Elizabeth spoke first. "I've made a decision," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were red. "I want you to adopt Sophia." Maria felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Elizabeth, let me finish," Elizabeth interrupted gently. "I've thought about this constantly. I've talked to my therapist, to the social workers, to everyone, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I'm 17 years old. I'm still recovering from what my father did to me. I need time to heal and figure out who I am. I can't give Sophia what she needs right now." "But you love her," Maria said. "I do, with everything I have, which is why I want her to be with you." Elizabeth wiped away tears. "You saved her life. You've been there for her every single day. You love her the way I love her, and you're ready to be a mother in a way I'm not. I don't have money. I can barely afford my apartment." "My father has money," Elizabeth said. "A lot of it. And I'm his only heir. When I turn 18, I'll have access to a trust fund. I want to set up something for Sophia, an education fund. Something so she'll never have to struggle the way you've struggled." Maria started crying. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take care of her," Elizabeth said. "Say you'll love her and protect her and give her the life she deserves." "I will," Maria whispered. "I promise I will." Patricia cleared her throat. "There's still a process to go through. The home study has to be finalized. The court has to approve the adoption, and we need to work out the details of Elizabeth's involvement in Sophia's life. But if everyone is in agreement, we can move forward." Elizabeth looked at Maria. "I want to be part of her life. Not as her mother, but as, I don't know, maybe an aunt, someone she can know and trust." "Is that okay with you?" "Of course," Maria said. "She should know where she came from. She should know that you loved her enough to give her the best chance at life." They both cried then, these two young women who'd been thrown together by the worst circumstances, and somehow found themselves in this moment of sacrifice and love and impossible decisions. The news got out, of course. Someone leaked the story that Elizabeth was giving up her baby for adoption to the woman who'd found her. The media went crazy again. Some people praised Elizabeth for her maturity. Others criticized her for giving up her child. Everyone had an opinion, but Maria and Elizabeth stopped paying attention to the noise. They focused on Sophia and on the future. They focused on doing what was best for a baby who'd been given a second chance at life. The community started rallying around Maria. The diner's regular customers started a crowdfund to help her with baby expenses. Mr. Chen gave her a raise and promised flexible hours. Her professors worked with her to adjust her schedule. People she'd never even met sent her baby clothes, diapers, gift cards. "People are good," Mr. Chen told her one day. "They just need something to remind them to be good." Meanwhile, Richard Whitmore's trial was approaching. He'd stopped trying to see Elizabeth. His lawyers advised against it, said it would look bad. Elizabeth was relieved. She never wanted to see her father again. The housekeeper had pleaded guilty and was serving probation in exchange for her testimony. She'd sent Elizabeth a letter apologizing, but Elizabeth hadn't read it yet. She wasn't ready. 3 months after finding Sophia, Maria went to court for the adoption hearing. Elizabeth was there, along with Patricia, Detective Reed, and a small group of supporters. The judge was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who'd reviewed all the paperwork carefully. She asked Maria a series of questions. Could she support a child financially? Did she understand the responsibilities of parenthood? Was she prepared for the challenges ahead? Maria answered honestly. No, she didn't have much money. Yes, she understood it would be hard. And yes, she was as prepared as anyone could be. The judge then turned to Elizabeth. Miss Whitmore, you're voluntarily terminating your parental rights. Do you understand what that means? Yes, Elizabeth said clearly. It means Maria will be Sophia's legal mother. And you're certain this is what you want? Elizabeth looked at Maria, then at the judge. I'm certain that this is what Sophia needs. And that's what matters. The judge was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her gavel. The court finds that this adoption is in the best interest of the child. Adoption approved. The sound of that gavel coming down was the most beautiful sound Maria had ever heard. Maria brought Sophia home on a cold afternoon in February, almost 4 months after finding her in that dumpster. She'd spent the past week preparing her tiny apartment, trying to make space for a baby in a place that barely had space for one person. She'd moved her bed against the wall and set up a crib next to it. Mr. Chen had given her a hand-me-down changing table from when his kids were babies. The community had donated so many baby clothes and supplies that Maria had to store some at the diner. When Maria walked through her apartment door carrying Sophia for the first time, she felt overwhelmed. This was real now. This baby was hers. She was responsible for keeping another human being alive. Sophia looked around the small apartment with wide eyes, taking in her new home. She was 4 months old now, healthy and alert and beautiful. She'd come so far from that tiny, cold baby Maria had pulled from the trash. That first night was hard. Sophia woke up every 2 hours crying, and Maria had no idea what she was doing. She tried feeding her, changing her, rocking her, walking with her. Eventually, exhausted and close to tears herself, Maria called the hospital's nursing hotline. The nurse on the phone talked her through it patiently. Sometimes babies just need time to adjust to a new place, she explained. Sometimes they can sense their caregiver's anxiety, and it makes them anxious too. Try to relax. Try to breathe. You're doing fine. By morning, both Maria and Sophia were exhausted, but they'd made it through their first night together. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and feeding schedules. Maria had to cut her class load in half and adjust her hours at the diner to accommodate Sophia's needs. Money was tighter than ever. But every time Maria looked at Sophia's face, she knew she'd made the right choice. Mr. Chen had been true to his word about flexible hours. He let Maria bring Sophia to work during quiet times, and the regular customers loved seeing the baby. Old Mrs. Peterson, who came in every morning for coffee, would hold Sophia while Maria served other tables. The truck drivers who passed through always asked about the baby they'd heard so much about. Maria's professors were understanding too. Most of them anyway. One told her she'd never make it through college with a baby, that she should have thought about that before taking on such a huge responsibility. Maria wanted to tell that professor the whole story, wanted to explain that she'd saved this baby's life, but she didn't. She just worked twice as hard in that class to prove him wrong. Elizabeth visited regularly. At first, the meetings were awkward. Elizabeth would come to Maria's apartment and hold Sophia, tears streaming down her face. She'd tell the baby she loved her, that she was sorry, that giving her up was the hardest thing she'd ever done. But slowly, over time, the visits became easier. Elizabeth and Maria developed an unlikely friendship. They were so different. Elizabeth from wealth and privilege, Maria from poverty and struggle, but they were connected by their love for Sophia. Elizabeth's 18th birthday came in April. True to her word, she immediately set up a trust fund for Sophia. It wasn't as much as it could have been. Most of the Whitmore fortune was tied up in legal battles related to Richard's case, but it was enough to guarantee Sophia's education and give her opportunities. Maria never had. I want her to have choices. Elizabeth told Maria, I want her to be able to become whoever she wants to be. Richard Whitmore's trial happened in May. It was a media circus. The prosecution presented all the evidence, the locket, The testimony from the housekeeper, Elizabeth's statement, Detective Reed's investigation. Richard's lawyers tried their best, but there was no defending what he'd done. The jury found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison. It wasn't enough in Maria's opinion, but it was something. Elizabeth didn't attend the sentencing. She'd said everything she needed to say during the trial. She was focused on moving forward now, on building a life for herself that wasn't defined by her father's actions. She'd enrolled in community college and was living in a small apartment near campus. She was studying psychology, hoping to eventually work with teenagers who'd been through trauma. She went to therapy twice a week and was slowly healing. On Sophia's first birthday, Maria threw a small party at her apartment. It was crowded. Mr. Chen was there with his wife. Detective Reed came with his wife. Patricia from Child Services brought a gift. And of course Elizabeth was there. They sang happy birthday while Sophia smashed a small cake with her hands, getting frosting everywhere. Everyone laughed and took pictures. It was a simple celebration, but it was filled with love. After everyone left and Sophia was asleep, Maria sat on her bed and looked around her small apartment. It wasn't much. The walls were thin, the heating was unreliable, and there was barely enough space for 2 people. But it was home. She thought about where she'd been a year ago, working at the diner, struggling through college, wondering if things would ever get better. She never could have imagined finding a baby in the trash, never could have imagined fighting to adopt that baby, never could have imagined becoming a mother at 19. But here she was. And somehow, despite everything, she was happy. The next few years weren't easy. There were times when Maria wanted to give up. Times when the stress of balancing school, work, and motherhood felt like too much. Times when Sophia was sick and Maria couldn't afford to take time off work. Times when Maria failed a test because she'd been up all night with a teething baby. But there were good times too. Sophia's first words, her first steps, the way she'd laugh at silly faces, the way she'd reach for Maria whenever she was scared. The unconditional love that only a child can give. Maria graduated from college when Sophia was 3. It took her 5 years instead of 4, but she did it. She walked across that stage in her cap and gown with Sophia in the audience, holding a sign that said, "That's my mommy," that Elizabeth had helped her make. Maria's degree was in social work. She decided during her journey with Sophia that she wanted to help other vulnerable children. She wanted to be someone who fought for kids who had nobody else fighting for them. She got a job at a nonprofit organization that worked with abandoned and neglected children. The pay wasn't great, but it was better than the diner. And more importantly, it was meaningful. Every child she helped, she thought about Sophia. About how different things could have been if Maria had walked past that dumpster. If she hadn't stopped to investigate that crying sound. Elizabeth finished her degree too and started working at a crisis center for teenagers. She was good at her job. She understood trauma in a way that people who hadn't lived through it never could. She remained a constant presence in Sophia's life. Sophia called her Aunt Lizzie and loved her visits. Elizabeth would bring books and toys and tell Sophia stories. She was careful never to overstep, never to confuse Sophia about who her mother was. But her love for Sophia was obvious to anyone who saw them together.